And in the second part of the talk, we will discuss about commonalities in criteria across the analyzed assessment frameworks. Here, in this part of the talk, we will mostly focus on these hub orientations, like general considerations when setting up an assessment framework. Next slide, please. And in our analysis, we've discovered many frameworks have different workflows, often combined. In a self-assessment, the developer follows the guidance material and undertakes its own assessment. In the expert assessment, the app submission of the developer is evaluated and decided further on approval or rejection. And there are phases, specific phases and blocks of assessment that we identified, such as an initial assessment, that it can take the form of a self-assessment provided by the app developers to assess the eligibility of the app. That's also highly important. A technical assessment, of course, where the app is assessed against a defined set of criteria. A functional assessment, also important, where the app is being actually tested with real users from a committee to ensure that proper functionality exists. Of course, it's important to have a feedback session where the team shares the assessment results with the developers, and the accreditation process where the app is actually conferred the specific accreditation. Next slide, please. And we found that important aspects to consider in the assessment process is that different assessment frameworks can decide to have a qualitative or quantitative assessment model. So a quantitative outcome is something represented by a general score, a percentage, while a quantitative assessment is based on a pass or fail schema, where the assessed health apps actually receive a quality seal. And there are mandatory requirements that can be defined, and also optional requirements that can be recommended for the health app developers to implement. And also, as I previously mentioned, it's important to share the assessment report with the app development team, to have a feedback process that is transparent for all stakeholders involved. And also what we found that it can be considered to implement a semi-automated assessment process where possible. Next slide, please. So another important aspect is so a key to ensuring quality is a regular update, and to keep assessment frameworks up to date, a revision process taking into account all regulatory and legislative aspects is considered by most frameworks. The update frequency varies strongly between assessment frameworks, and usually they are updated regularly, either on an annual basis or every 2 or 3 years. And it's important to consider reviewing them in the light of new regulations and standards, and also consider refining and or reaching the framework criteria based on experiences and lessons learned, also considering the cross-border perspective. Next slide, please. And another important part is, okay, how do we ensure the sustainability of the assessment process? How do we define a funding or a business model? And we found that depending on the purpose of evaluation, different sustainability pathways and business models can be considered. Some frameworks are sustained through public funding, but some assessment frameworks actually perceive fees for the assessment and inclusion in the repository or in a reimbursement list. And we can consider layered approaches for different types of categories, so different fees for individuals, small to medium enterprises or large companies, or different fees for the different assessment steps. There are also frameworks that consider yearly fees for apps being included in the repository. Next slide, please. Another important step is how we actually make available the assessment results. So how do we set up an interface, a digital health library repository where we include the assessment results and the health apps? And we found that when building a repository, it's important to consider information, including information on the website about the language and the scope. Is it an international initiative that receives worldwide applications, or is it a national or regional initiative that is language specific? It's important to detail information about how the assessment process is being done to be transparent for all stakeholders involved. It is important, of course, to ensure trust, how the repository is updated and maintained, and also information about apps. So to help the end users to find the best apps for their personal needs rather than just focusing on assessment criteria, to consider elements such as app functions, who is supporting the app, where does the product has more impact and for which population, and of course the search filters to ease the navigation through the repository. Next slide. And what we've also discovered is that it is important to encourage the adoption by the end users, be it citizens, patients, be it healthcare professionals, and proper communication and dissemination activities about the evaluation processes, about the apps and how they can be used. We've discovered that some organizations also carry out trainings with healthcare organizations or patient organizations on how to use these health apps repositories. Next slide, please. And last but not least, another important step is to encourage reflexive learnings, and that one of the barriers to mHealth implementation actually is represented by a lack of collaboration, and we highly encourage to consider reflexive learning, what worked, what didn't, and to adapt the process and keep it flexible according to the lessons learned. Next slide, please. So these were the main guidance elements we have identified, and now we would like to open up the discussion and hear your opinion, given that we are such a diverse group. So what actually has been useful from this presentation, and I give it back to Strahil.
Thank you, Alexandra. Of course, these are learnings from detailed analysis. So for example, if you're interested to see how a certain assessment framework implemented their workflow or what kind of experts they involved, you would have to go back to the Knowledge 2.1 where we have these examples and more details. And another point maybe to make is this is like common elements. We've tried to put them on a timeline, but of course it's not the canonical one. So for example, if we think about the sustainability or business model, we've put it here as, I don't know which, step 7 or so. Of course, you have to start thinking early on about those things, even probably before you you start implementing your assessment framework. So these are just high-level considerations for you to make, with more details available in the Knowledge tool. With that said, we will go back to Mentimeter, where we actually see that we have some good mix again, and we're asking everyone, those who have experience and have an assessment framework in place and know about it, do these generic steps and considerations reflect well your own process? Are we missing something? Or if you don't have an assessment framework, do you feel like this is a good kind of guidance for you to kickstart a process for you to consider implementing? And of course, the hub can facilitate this process by linking you to the right experts from the Knowledge 2.1 and the assessment frameworks. So let me just go to the next question in Mentimeter. Yeah, so the main question is, does the presented set of common elements reflect your own experiences for those who have an assessment framework, or are there other considerations that should be included? And it is an open type of question, I believe, where you have to enter text. Yes. I'll give you a bit more time. We'll also, in a few moments, open for any kind of reflections you'd like to make. You can unmute yourself, but let's just first look at the comments.
Very positive ones.
Yes, that's a good sign, because this is a piece that we want to append, to add to the knowledge, to the original version of the knowledge too. So it's great to see that it's perceived as useful. There are some considerations such as classification or medical device. Yes. Biggest problem in cooperation with stakeholders from our region and with insurance companies. I can imagine that's a difficult thing to do. Okay, the link to the regulatory framework or legislation linked to the assessment framework has to be mentioned, explained. Indeed, it's different in the different countries and regions, but it can be a barrier or it can be a driver. So it indeed needs to be considered from the beginning, what is possible, and if not, should legislation be adapted or changed. Okay, there are some suggestions for some concrete apps to have a look at. I also saw that in the chat. So that's great for the audience to have a look at it.
Yes, I also see the point of the new medical device regulation, which is highly important, and there are talks going on, and we do agree. We just touched on general consideration, but we are aware of it as well.
Yeah, clinical benefit of the app is a very important one. Indeed, we saw that most frameworks do address this aspect, but whether they should be a minimum for this, kind of a minimum requirement or a minimum set of criteria, is a good question, because this is, after all, the central idea behind a quality label. Okay, great, thank you. So if you also have some further comments you'd like to make, just like you can unmute yourself and share your experience or your feedback in addition to the Mentimeter. We have a few moments for that. We have something like 2-3 minutes if you'd like to share further insights.
I've added a few insights in the chat. Petra Hoognorn on ISO 82304 Part 2, which is a new standard for an assessment framework that has recently received almost a perfect vote by member countries, both from CEN, ISO and IEC, and is expected to be published in around September. And we've already made an assessment framework based on CEN ISO for the Dutch Ministry of Health. And a few more details in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. It's great, I think, that to have this kind of effort that aims to really help out those that don't have an assessment framework. If I remember correctly from our analysis, the standard covers to a great extent all the different elements, the criteria and domains that we have identified. So it has a huge potential.
Yeah, I'm checking it now against a lot of existing frameworks, and so far my findings are that CEN ISO covers all of the, nearly all of the subjects covered in the existing frameworks. And what we've already done for the Dutch Ministry of Health, you can add your own criteria on top, which was only one in the case of the Netherlands. If they're specific to your country, or as you mentioned before in the presentation as well. What we've seen so far is the things that were not covered were things like in the DTAC, which is from the NHS. Are you registered with authority such and so, and when have you last been checked, which is of course not something that's going to be part of an international standard. That's a local thing, but you can easily add it, but still get the benefits of having a standardized framework also from the perspective of app developers who now have to spend a lot of time if they want to go through all these different scattered in that sense, to use Birgit's word, framework, which is very time consuming. And in the interviews that I've had with a number of app developers, they mentioned perhaps I should go to the US because this is wearing me out.
Oh, I don't want that. Yeah,
No.
thank you, Petra. Okay, if there's no further comments that you'd like to make live, thank you very much, and I will give back the word to Belén.
Thank you, Alexandra and Strahil. So then we now move to the second part that is another aspects to consider, and then this part, let me show the presentation. There will be 3 members of the QT1 working group presenting it. Okay, so here it is. This is not. Okay, I've got it. Okay, so I will start, and then my colleagues Richard Paštěka from University of Vienna and Maja Skorin from Ericsson Croatia will also participate, because this is a work that we have done together, all the partners, and they are showing some advances, right? So the fact is that we are in a fragmented landscape. It has advantage and disadvantage. There is a large heterogeneity when it comes to the target audience of the frameworks. To what extent they are more or less comprehensiveness, because in some cases the frameworks have a very clear focus and they just want to assess that. Also the dev, in some occasions there is just some recommendations for developers. In other cases it is like much more deeper. Also the format. So and sometimes this heterogeneity is a consequence of the target audience that the framework is approaching. So we think heterogeneity is something, and diversity is something that we have to manage with. But the fact is that it is also a barrier and a hurdle for moving forward in this harmonization. As said before, we have identified around 25 frameworks and also 21 repositories in Europe. So it is a big amount. Just to put everybody in the same page, if you remember, we structured the work in 12 domains. Of course, this is not like a taxonomy. Some frameworks could approach in a different way, but it was a way of manage diverse information, right? So each of these domains, we analyze, let's say, specific criteria or aspects within them, right? And then we made, for example, some visualizations as a way of showing this criteria coverage. So now, at this point, the focus is not the framework itself. The focus is more to see in a global perspective to what extent that aspect is covered by many frameworks. So it is a good candidate for thinking in an harmonization in that aspect, because there are also singularity that makes sense for every framework. So we have classified this, let's say, this small pieces of the pie chart in 3 levels. The level 1 would be like the more intense. It is the level where at least 20 out of the 24 frameworks analyzed in the report pay attention to that in different ways, but it is there in that framework. And then we have created 2 more levels in a decreasing sense, what we have called level 2 and level 3, with lower percentages, where there are a good number of frameworks covering that, but we cannot say that this is like something so where there is so strong consensus, right? The further work done by the KT1 working group has focused on the intensity level 1, and this is where my colleagues will present some of the findings and ideas. Before that, we have a third Mentimeter question, a very easy and quick one. So I would invite you to go into it. Strahil, do I make you presenter for this part?
Yes, please.
Okay. And then we start explaining the different levels. Just 1 second. Okay, it's done.
Okay, so the next question we have for you would be, in your opinion, how important is it to move forward the mutual recognition between existing health apps assessment frameworks in Europe?
Yeah, it seems clear that this is something that the audience consider relevant, probably, especially for those in the offer side, the developers and the companies.
Yeah. Okay, so we know that we think it's important or very important. So what can be done, or what are we doing in the hub? I guess would be the next part.
Yeah, so the presentation come back to me. Let me just skip this this one. You don't need to go to Mentimeter now again. It's just, I am just moving there. Wait a second, please. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the presenting it. So beginning with this intensity level 1, I will give now the floor to Richard Paštěka, that will talk about those aspects regarding privacy that have come into this group. Richard, when you wish, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Belén, and good morning, everybody. So I would like to take a few minutes to touch on some commonalities that we saw in the assessment frameworks regarding the domain of privacy. I think nobody is surprised that the criteria of privacy are covered by a majority of the frameworks, but nevertheless, I see it as a good example to go through, as it can be seen as one of the leading assessment domains. So I will go through these 3 bullet points, starting from the very top. We found that the majority of the reviewed assessment framework cover the compliance with the some kind of applicable international law or guidelines. And there in the center is the consent of the user. So, which is of course a good thing that the focus is user-centric, and this has been driven by legal requirements such as GDPR, to mention but one, and can be seen as an overall successful effort to ensure and to look at the privacy of a personal health data. Alternatively, the frameworks also often address privacy by design and privacy by default principles. If I now build on the previous point and go a little bit deeper into the requirements that are given by the national legislations, the majority of the assessment frameworks again cover the regulatory and legal requirements for the mHealth solutions that need to be met in the given country. And in addition to these, the assessment framework also inquire quite often about best practice approaches for the mHealth application and specify them. Some of them also expand on this and furthermore address operating licenses or some kind of certification that can be awarded by an institution. My third point and the third commonality that is often addressed by the assessment framework is if the patient data, how the patient data is handled, and if the patient data is handled with the consent and legitimate interest. And as many of the mHealth applications are free of charge, this might raise concern about what type of data are being collected. And this is also, of course, reflected then by the criteria and addressed in the assessment frameworks themselves. And they often inquire about if the terms and conditions are clearly described and if the informed consent is granted by the user. So to which level, and is this covered, somehow addressed in a clear way, so really the patient can have, or the user of the app can make an informed decision about this. If we go a bit deeper, some of the frameworks also inquire about what analytics and other associated services are used on the patient data. Also together with access policy, for instance, and data treatment. So in summary of these three above mentioned points, we can see that these have been covered by the majority of the framework. They have them in their criteria catalog, and this somehow reflects the successful implementation of legal requirements and drive the data privacy further. With this, I would like to hand over to my colleague Maja, who is going to talk us through a different domain from Entity Level 1.
Hi everyone. Hi. Greetings from Croatia. I'm speaking today because two criteria from the domain I worked on, from the effectiveness domain, are on this level 1 intensity list, meaning, as Belén said, they are covered in more than 83% of assessed frameworks. Before I start talking about this exact two criteria, I just want to say a few words about effectiveness domain generally. First, when I started the research on effectiveness domain, I just went briefly through available materials for 24 assessed frameworks, and I was searching for word effectiveness, of course. And I counted that only 9 out of 24 assessed frameworks mentioned effectiveness explicitly. Meaning only 9 out of 24 had dedicated section to effectiveness or had at least one compliance question about effectiveness. Then we did a more detailed analysis through 7 different criteria that we defined under the effectiveness domain. So it showed us that effectiveness is partly covered to other domains, which we'll see in these two criteria. So these two, you can see on your screen, are actually covered in 20 out of 24. So we get from 9 out of 24 to 20 out of 24. First criteria is about health benefits app is claiming to have. So even though, as I already said, some assessment frameworks do not mention effectiveness explicitly, they do ask about claimed health benefits of the application, but they ask it as a part of different domains. They ask it under the technical assessment or under evidence of outcomes, under maybe quality and safety, medical aspects, etc. Some assessment frameworks ask precise questions like what health benefits does this health app bring to the patient? Precise and direct. On the other hand, there are a lot of questions in assessment frameworks that do not directly ask about health benefits, but do cover this criterion. These are questions like what is the medical purpose of the app, or maybe which health problem does the app want to prevent, or what health behavior does the app want to promote. So they're all asking about almost the same thing, but in a different ways. Usually, if the assessment framework asks about health benefits the app is claiming to have, it is followed by asking for evidence of those claimed benefits. So this is the last criteria you can see on this slide. It's also covered in 20 out of 24 assessed frameworks. So some assessment frameworks do not explicitly mention evidence here, but they do capture content and information sources. They ask if specialized professionals or health department or scientific society validated the content. And if there is no evidence available, assessment frameworks usually ask for an explanation of how the app content is developed, and is it relevant and is it reliable. So to wrap it up, we realized that all those assessment frameworks ask for the same thing in different ways. We realized that 20 out of 24 ask about health benefits and require some evidence of those benefits. And logical conclusion after it was, okay, this is really important. So that's why we are talking about it today. And the question that is following, and the question I would like to finish with, and we should all think about, is should this criteria be addressed by everyone when assessing mHealth app? Should this be a kind of standard? Should this be a kind of minimal requirement? And what are the ways to implement it? Okay, that's all from me. Thank you, Belén. You can continue.
Thank you both, Richard and Maja. Okay, so I will take just 5 minutes to explain this was the level 1 that we get into more detail, but in the report we will include also what we have found for level 2 and level 3. Obviously, the less intensity it is, the less intensity, sorry, the more number of criteria appears. So in this level 2, that well, it still has a good number of frameworks that cover it, between 2/3 and 83. We have from not only from privacy and effectiveness, but also some other criteria from transparency, safety, or security. For example, about transparency to inform what is the app information used for, and so on. I will not get into detail here. You will have the information. And it's just to share with you this structure, and this is a basis that we are providing from the hub to start thinking on these harmonizations. And then finally, if there is an interest in expanding this, there would be like by 3. Here you see much more initiatives, because here the coverage is restrictive. It's lower from the different domains and specific criteria. For example, let's say in reliability, if the app is consistent with the functions, there are many things here that you can see. So reach this point, we would like to end before the discussion, because our objective was to have around 30 minutes for the discussion. So I congratulate all the participants, because we have stick to time and we have time enough. But prior to that, and also to the closing, we have a 4 Mentimeter, and at the end we will have also a Mentimeter about your opinion on this session. And after that, I will also include in the chat, if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned 2 documents that we are not talking today about, but they are there, and we will include them in the report, and they are open for consultation. It was the innovative insights and the aspects in which the assessment frameworks might enrich, because sometimes the effort is done in putting in place in setting up the framework, but then there is some continuous update that, as in everything, maintenance sometimes is a challenge, right? So you will have now the 4 Mentimeter. I am introducing it now through. I will give the screen control to Strahil, and then we can start the discussion both on part 1 or part 2. Thank you.
Okay, so the question we have for you, and this part relates to, could you suggest effective ways of moving forward the goal of mutual recognition between existing health apps frameworks in Europe?
Yeah, it's a quite ambitious question, but it's just to share, given the high number of people here today, to share proposals and to see how they see it. You can also, because we put an example, but I think it was missing. An example was, for example, creating a task force or a specific group of interested countries, or let's say operational ways of moving forward on this. We are seeing, for example, and here please Richard and Maja, feel free also to comment. For example, some twinning experiences that actually some regions have already have. From Andalusia, we had it with Portugal and also with Belgium. We see also the acceptance of a general framework accepted by the competent authorities, and always it's important the input of the stakeholders.
I think also what we see here is the reference to regulations, as it works quite well, I would say, for the privacy domain, and of course standardization, which was mentioned also in the chat. That could be a way to go. And I think something we wanted to open the discussion with was also the option of expert groups, that I did not see this being mentioned, but there are other alternatives to it, like workshops or partnerships, rotative management, and etc.
I personally like this the idea of member states signing an agreement of mutual recognition, meaning if one assessment framework said that mobile application is verified and it's good, then the other country maybe do not need to do complete assessment.
Yeah, there is also a mention of certification, and this is something that is already to some extent being done, but it for sure could be strengthened.
Yeah, it's true. In a way, I think all this information from the different Mentimeter questions will be also input for the work and will be reflected also in the work that we use. So we can take a bit more time and then we can start the discussion. If someone of you want to introduce some questions for discussion in the chat, or maybe if you want to participate directly, this is the time for it. Thank you. This is a great opportunity because we have many people, and probably we have people from countries and from assessment framework owners and so on.
I think also if there are no questions, the floor is open for reflections or thoughts, summaries. So as Belén said, we are here to learn as well and to talk. So whoever wants to contribute is welcome for sure.
Yeah, if I may, I think it's of special relevance, the message that Birgit has posted in the chat regarding the call that the European Commission has published regarding the promotion of a trusted mHealth level in Europe. I think it touches the core of this activity, and I think it's a very relevant initiative from the European Commission to address this topic. Thank you.
Strahil, I will include now a cover with the discussion title, right? As I think the Mentimeter number 4 is done. Do you agree?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We invite also to those countries or regions that maybe join this webinar and they are interested in the moving forward in assessment, but they are in a very initial stage, also to share her ideas, or also for those others in a more mature level. I mean, there are several things to say.
I would here perhaps highlight as well, when now I was going through the chat, and there has a question regarding the ethical concerns and public health impact, and Petra already posted an answer in the chat, but just to highlight it for everybody who might not read it, there are also other deliverables from the KT1 and other knowledge tools, and one of them is addressing ethics directly. So maybe also a good resource for you to look at.
Maybe if I can add something, I know there are some assessment framework owners of different member states present in the call today. It would be interesting that they share with us what the final purpose of their assessment framework is, because you have different scopes that you can set up an assessment framework for. So is it the route towards reimbursement? Is it obtaining a quality label so you have a kind of repository where healthcare providers can use to prescribe apps? Because that's, of course, there are different outcomes of the assessment frameworks, and if we want to move to a mutual recognition, we can agree on the parameters that should be covered and then define criteria on how to assess them. But if the outcome of your framework is something completely different, we will need mutual recognition for different pathways. So it would be interesting to see how, for what exactly you're using the assessment framework, for which purpose, and on which level.
Maybe to make it easier, if we can put it in a question in the meantime in the Mentimeter, Belén, if you can share, maybe I can quickly do that.
Yeah, sure.
So I think we had at least 10 to 12 participants that mentioned they are representing assessment framework owners. Someone said road towards reimbursement. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but it would be really interesting just if you care to share with us like the vision around that. So is it planned? Is it first setting up the assessment framework and waiting for some evidence to be able to make the case for reimbursement, or is it already planned, and what kind of time period does it refer to?
Stefan de Punt, ML Belgium. I can maybe explain, because I've put that So for mHealth Belgium, which is the medical app assessment framework in Belgium, it is both a quality label on the one hand to show to the users, be it the patients or the healthcare professionals, which medical apps fulfill criteria made by the government. But secondly, for the industry, for the providers of the tools, the medical apps, it is also the way towards reimbursement, because they have to comply first to level 1 and level 2 in our mHealth Belgium pyramid, and by then they can move to level 3 about reimbursement. So that means that if they fulfill the first 2 levels, then they can submit a reimbursement dossier to the payer authorities. So that's the reason why I've put it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, maybe if there are no more direct questions or comments now, of course, I am now sharing the email that most of you might already know from the hub, and we are sorry we cannot offer a coffee break now. That would be the thing that would make sense, and we would enjoy together of the interaction. Anyway, just to remind that first apologize again for the recording issues at the beginning, but most of the session was recorded, and we will also compile what here we have gathered, and I'm happy to meet you again. Let me share the final question, and prior to that, for those willing to open their cameras, I think it would be nice to capture this moment. Of course, feel free to do it or not. Thank you. And then I will go to the Mentimeter. I would ask my colleague Violeta if she could also save this screen.
Yes, sure.
I am putting this here. Okay, thank you, Joel. So then I think we can share the UAS Mentimeter, Strahil. That is just to summarize in one word. How do you feel about this session? And it is good for us to have that kind of input. Thank you.
And don't worry, it's anonymous.
In the meantime, I can also say final word. As Belén said, it's a pity that we can't gather around a coffee now to in a more informal way discuss how we can take this mutual recognition or moving towards more harmonization, how we can take it further, because it's not so easy we don't want to impose it top down, and you see there are different interests. It's you acknowledge that it's important to move towards further harmonization, but we would be very keen on receiving your input on how to achieve that, because that's not so straightforward. We see different parameters that need to be covered that are important, but you all address them in a different way, and agreeing on how to assess privacy and look into standardization efforts, and that's one way. But we also have to agree on what is the common purpose of the assessment framework. Is it on a European level, at least? On national level, you have different drivers, but we can't promise European reimbursement, for example, as the ultimate goal of the framework when you reach the top. So what is the common European driver there to apart from a more unified market, of course, and market access? But that's also something to reflect on, and it's nice to put words that yes, it needs to be harmonized and Commission needs to do it, but how? Because it needs to be a co-creative process, and we need your help and the experience of the forerunning countries that already have frameworks in place or are starting to set up frameworks. What's the final aim? What's the purpose of the framework? Because there needs to be an added value for all stakeholders involved. And as always in healthcare, things are more complex because there's so many stakeholders involved. We have the patients, we have the healthcare providers, we have the suppliers, and I certainly forget some. So they all have different elements to gain with framework, and it's not only always easy to satisfy all in one action. So please reach out to the mHealth Hub or to me directly or to whomever you saw today if you have ideas on that, on how to take it further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Birgit. We share the information as said before, and I would like to take the opportunity to announce that on mid-UI, well, I have not commented the feedback, but there are several different things. We will take them into account. Maybe I have the first one read is too much Mentimeter. Maybe it's something to consider, but we are happy to see that there are. It has been helpful for people to know about this and to know what things we are doing. And our work go on mid-July. We are having a new talk. So I can share with you it is not yet confirmed by the speakers, but I can share the idea. So I will share it, and then anyway, since you were registered to this hub talk, you will receive information about this. Thank you. Here we would share our colleagues working on another part of the hub work, consisting on synergies and partnerships and so on. They have gathered with ORCA members some examples of how they have been supporting member states in mHealth, for example, in Norway or even in Canada and also in Netherlands. So they will share their experience through the hub in this event before all dessert for all holidays. So thank you very much. So we will wrap up here, and hope to see you soon. And thank you to all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.